The Zimbabwean government has welcomed a High Court ruling which found that the termination of the Zimbabwe Exemption Permit is unconstitutional, unlawful and invalid. So this means that permit holders cannot be arrested, deported or detained due to its validity being extended by another year. The Home Affairs Department previously extended the expired permits until December this year in order to go through thousands of applications. Let's get your reaction now to this latest court decision. Zimbabwe's Director of International Communications, Richard Mahomva, joins us from Harare this morning. Richard, great to talk to you. What's your reaction to this court decision here in South Africa?
Good morning, and thanks for having me. The starting point is that first and foremost as Zimbabwe, we take note of this phenomenal judiciary position, and we also commend it as an internal and as a domestic legal process that has occurred in South Africa. A nation whose sovereign integrity we are confident in, and it also speaks effectively of the extent to which the three arms of government in South Africa are independent. And for me, I think it's a move that should be applauded in that regard because it speaks to the separation of powers. But it's an initiative that we fully take note of and really appreciate from a perspective of internal processes occurring within the context of our separation of powers.
Well, the point of this is, Richard, as well, that this is another temporary extension, which means this discussion is going to still continue and there will be yet another decision if government indeed does fulfill the obligations that the court says it missed this time in making the decision. How do you hope that the next 12 months of this extension should unfold in South Africa?
Number one, I think let's look at the contextual merit of the case in point. It is an outcome of fulfilling universal access to administrative justice systems. So it actually means that South Africa is alive, or the South African system is alive to the systems of access to administrative justice. And from a Pan-Africanist standpoint, that also affirms the extent to which there is consideration on the interconnectedness of our economies, and also considering that these ZEP holders were bona fide participants in the South African economy. So this effectively speaks to the diplomatic collegiality of our two nations, which is also being reinforced by the law. And we may possibly see perhaps maybe an appeal from the Minister of Home Affairs. We may perhaps see this conversation taking various turns. But for now, I think what ought to be acknowledged and noted is that the principle of access to administrative justice has been served, and that, our countries are going to deepen their relationship from the entry point of the interconnectedness of our economy that is espoused by these exemption permits.
Yeah, so one of the things the court said in that ruling was that government didn't fulfill the issue of wide consultations before it made this decision on the Zimbabwe Exemption Permit. Would the Zimbabwean government be part and privy to those consultations? And what would the input be from your government, Richard?
You'd recall that when our two countries had a joint permanent national commission, this issue featured very prominently last year. So at an interministerial level, I think there should be a conversation, our Minister of Home Affairs and Comrade Motsoaledi. So I think that is something that has got a technical underpinning, which should see our ministers engaging. But you'd also recall that the Zimbabwean government has has made it a matter of common record that it was ready to receive Zimbabweans that are willing to come back home, because also I find it as a token of gratitude to say you've hosted our people, but if your systems can no longer fully accommodate, we are equally ready. So I think this generates an ongoing conversation that prepares the Zimbabwean side, that also facilitates the South African government to follow the law with respect to adherence to the Immigration Act. And you'd also recall that this has set a particular precedent which may not necessarily be applicable within the Zim South Africa context, but it can apply to other parts of the continent. So it's setting a precedent, and because it's setting a precedent, readers of the law and readers of politics should be able, and maybe public policy formulators should follow this matter closely so that we see what unfolds from the precedent that has been set for future policy making as far as the issue of immigration is concerned. And remember, this is coming against the backdrop of the architecture of the African Continental Free Trade Area system. So this should also cause us to construct analytical juxtapositions of what this means in the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area, what it means in terms of the freedom of labor and services across the African continent, and in particular in the SADC.
Yeah, the Asylum Seeker, Refugee and Migrant Coalition, we spoke to them here on Newzroom Africa in the wake of this High Court decision, and their concern is that the South African government, if it does fulfill what the court has said it should do, it may ultimately succeed in its plan to around this decision for the Zimbabwe Exemption Permit. The impact then surely on livelihoods would be devastating, Richard. I suppose part of what your government would hope for would be that we would move them here in South Africa to other visas rather than cancelling the ZEP altogether.
Without looking at it from an ardent administrative or ardent political position, I think there is need for a more humane approach, because look at what I've spoke about, that we need to situate this within the context of the African Continental Free Trade Area system that is being put in place and the other provisions. So we need to look at it within that broader spectrum and not see it as this extra benevolent gesture that is being extended to a particular, immigrant grouping. So we need to look at it from that holistic point of view. And remember, the fact that we are talking about registered Zimbabweans that have been participating, that are participating in the economy. So I strongly feel that there is need to move away from what may seem as a highly populist in terms of expediting interests of retrogressive movements like xenophobia and your dudula, because sometimes you do not want to be seen to be inclined towards the retrogressive trajectory that sometimes is not in touch with systems of the world evolving into a global village where labor and capital should be seen to be permeating across borders. And in the context of Pan-Africanism as well, I think it's very important.
Richard Mahomva is Zimbabwe's Director of International Communications. Richard, let me thank you for your time this morning here on the AM Report.